My son and daughter-in-law had been distant for years, cold, silent, and strangers in every sense. Then one morning, their call broke the silence I had lived with for so long. They sounded warm, loving, almost apologetic. And for a moment, I believed maybe love had found its way back. But that single call wasn't reconciliation. It was the beginning of the cruelest betrayal of my life. Where are you listening to my story from right now? And what time is it there? Hi, my name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 60 years old, a retired schoolteacher living in Boston, Massachusetts. For most of my life, I believed in quiet mornings, blooming gardens, and the simple kindness of people. After my husband passed away 5 years ago, I learned that silence can be both peaceful and painful. My days began blending together, the same breakfast tea, the same newspaper folded neatly beside me, the same window view of a city that kept moving while I stood still. The house we built together used to feel alive. His laughter echoed through the halls, his books filled the study, and his favorite mug still sits on the kitchen counter, as if waiting for him to return. I never had the heart to move it. Some people find comfort in letting go. I found mine in holding on. My only family left is my son, David, and his wife, Mila. They live across town, but might as well be across the ocean. After my husband's death, our bond slowly withered. Calls became rare, visits stopped altogether, and eventually, even birthdays passed in silence. I tried reaching out at first, but every attempt made me feel like I was intruding into their lives. I told myself they were busy, building careers, maybe even starting a family of their own. But deep down I knew, they had chosen distance. Still, every evening, I set 2 cups of tea. One for myself, and one that stayed untouched. It was my way of pretending that love still lived in this house, even if in memory. Sometimes I would walk to the old school where I used to teach, just to hear the sound of children laughing. I missed that energy, the chaos, the chatter, the warmth. It reminded me of better times, when David was small and used to wait for me outside the classroom, holding my hand all the way home. I used to think being a mother meant giving endlessly. But I never imagined there would come a day when I'd have nothing left to give, and still be asked for more. It was a Thursday morning, quiet like all the others. I had just finished watering the lilies by my window when the phone rang, a sound so rare in my house that for a moment I froze. My first thought was that it must be the pharmacy calling, or maybe the local library reminding me to return a book. But when I saw the name flashing on the screen, my heart stopped. David. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. Hello. My voice came out softer than I expected. Mom, came his reply, familiar, warm, yet distant. I hadn't heard that word from him in years. He sounded cheerful, even casual. How have you been? I wanted to say lonely or forgotten, but instead I said, I'm fine, dear. Just the usual. He chuckled lightly, as if everything between us had been normal all along. Listen, Mom, Mila and I are celebrating our 10th wedding anniversary next weekend. We're having a big dinner, at the Grand Elm on Charles Street. It wouldn't feel right without you there. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My throat tightened. You want me to come? Of course, he said smoothly. You're our guest of honor. Guest of honor. The words echoed through me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I could barely respond before he added, be there at 6. Don't worry about anything, we'll handle everything. And just like that, the call ended. I held the phone against my chest long after the line went silent. The emptiness of my living room suddenly felt lighter, as if hope had found its way back through that small piece of glass. Maybe this was the moment I'd been waiting for. An apology, a reunion, a chance to fix what time had broken. That evening, I sat by my husband's photo on the mantel and whispered, "Did you hear that, Michael? They still remember me." His smiling face in the frame seemed to glow under the lamplight, and for the first time in years, I felt I wasn't completely alone. Over the next few days, I poured myself into preparation like a nervous schoolgirl. I took out my best navy blue dress, the one I hadn't worn since Michael's retirement dinner. I ironed it twice, polished my old heels, and wrapped a small gift, an album I'd made years ago, filled with photos of David growing up. I imagined him smiling when he saw it, maybe even hugging me. The morning of the anniversary, Boston was alive with early spring air. The city smelled of fresh rain and new beginnings. As I stood by the mirror fastening my pearl earrings, a wave of nervous excitement fluttered inside me. Maybe this was my second chance. Maybe families, no matter how broken, could still find their way back home. The Grand Elm was more beautiful than I remembered. It stood on the corner of Charles Street, its tall glass doors reflecting the evening lights of Boston. Inside, chandeliers sparkled like captured stars, and the sound of laughter drifted through the wide banquet hall. I clutched my small purse tightly, trying to calm the fluttering in my chest. When I entered, no one seemed to notice me at first. Waiters moved swiftly between tables, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I spotted David across the room, dressed in a sharp black suit, his arm around Mila. They looked perfect together, young, confident, and glowing. For a brief second, my heart swelled with pride. I took a few hesitant steps toward them. "David," I called softly. He turned, his smile polite but fleeting. "Mom," he said, his tone clipped but not unkind. "You made it." Mila's eyes flicked over me, her lips curving into a practiced smile. "Evelyn, it's nice to see you." "Congratulations," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. 10 years, it's a beautiful milestone. "Yeah, thanks," David murmured before turning to greet another couple approaching him. I stood there awkwardly, my gift still in hand. After a few seconds, I walked to an empty corner table and placed my purse beside me. The room filled quickly. Business associates, friends, people I didn't recognize. Toasts were made, laughter echoed, and everyone seemed to have a place except me. I smiled when people passed, though no one stopped to talk. Still, I watched David from afar, admiring how grown-up he looked, how confident. I told myself it was enough just to be there, to witness his happiness. Dinner was served. I picked at the food, barely tasting it, my thoughts elsewhere. As the evening stretched on, I decided to give them my gift before leaving quietly. But before I could approach, a man in a black vest tapped David on the shoulder. "Sir, excuse me," he said politely. "We need the remaining balance for the event payment." I saw David's easy smile falter for just a moment. Then, calmly, he gestured toward me. "My mother will handle it." The waiter looked confused. "I'm sorry." David's voice grew louder, carrying across nearby tables. "My mother will take care of it," she insisted. A few heads turned. My chest tightened. "David," I whispered, standing up slowly. I never said." He gave me that look, half warning, half charm, the kind he used as a boy when caught doing something wrong. "Mom, you said you wanted to help. Please, just cover it now, I'll transfer the money later." People were watching. My palms were sweating, my throat dry. I nodded faintly, reaching into my purse for my checkbook. My hands trembled as I wrote the amount the manager mentioned, $18,000. The ink smudged slightly as I signed my name. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper," the man said before walking away. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my shaking fingers. When I turned back, Mila's expression had changed. She wasn't smiling now, her eyes held a glint I couldn't name, satisfaction perhaps. She leaned closer to me and whispered, her tone almost sweet. "You really thought we wanted you here, didn't you? We just needed someone to pay the bill." The music seemed to fade. I stared at her, unable to form words. David turned to the bartender. "Make sure my mother gets home safely," he said casually, as if I were some stranger. Then, without another glance, he took Mila's hand and disappeared into the crowd of guests. I stood there for a long time, the sound of laughter echoing like distant thunder. My chest ached, and for the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to feel invisible. Outside, the rain had started again. I walked alone under the streetlights, my dress damp, my shoes heavy, my heart breaking with every step. By the time I reached home, the rain had soaked through every layer of my clothes. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The darkness felt fitting, honest. I slipped off my shoes and sat on the edge of the couch, staring at my trembling hands. The image of Mila's smirk replayed in my mind, over and over, like a cruel loop I couldn't escape. $18,000. Every dollar from my savings. The same savings Michael and I had built for our retirement, for emergencies, for the just-in-case moments that life sometimes throws your way. I had spent it all, just to be humiliated. I opened my old photo album, the one I had meant to give them as a gift. David's baby pictures smiled up at me. His first day of school, his graduation, his wedding day. My tears blurred the faces until they became nothing but color and memory. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains, cruel in its brightness. My phone buzzed once, a message from David. For a moment, hope flickered again. Maybe he regretted what happened. Maybe he'd call to apologize. But it wasn't an apology. Thanks again for helping out last night, the message read. We'll sort out the transfer later. Don't make a big deal about it. That was it. No warmth. No remorse. Just entitlement. Like I was a bank account, not a mother. For 2 weeks, I tried convincing myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was the adult, the parent, that forgiveness was part of motherhood. But every time I checked my bank balance, the numbers reminded me of my mistake. Silence filled the house again, heavier than before. Then one morning, there was a sharp knock on the door. 2 people stood outside, a man in a dark suit and a woman holding a clipboard. Mrs. Evelyn Harper? The man asked. Yes, I replied cautiously. We're from the Boston Police Department, Financial Crimes Division. We need to ask you some questions regarding an outstanding loan in your name. My stomach twisted. Loan? I haven't taken any loan. The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. According to the records, a personal loan of $45,000 was taken 6 months ago under your signature and social security number. Payments have been defaulted. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My voice broke as I whispered, that's impossible. I never signed any papers. The woman handed me a document. My name printed neatly at the top, my signature scrawled at the bottom. My heart pounded as I stared at it. The handwriting looked eerily familiar, almost mine, but not quite. Is this your signature? The officer asked. I shook my head. No. Someone forged it. We'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to make an official statement, he said kindly. Bring any identification or financial documents you have. After they left, I sank to the floor, the papers trembling in my hands. My mind raced back to that night at the banquet hall, David's insistence, Mila's smirk, their sudden friendliness after years of silence. It all connected now. The call, the invitation, the payment. It was never reconciliation. It was preparation. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my name. That night, I couldn't sleep. The clock ticked endlessly, and every sound in the house felt louder than it should. Somewhere between fear and disbelief, a new feeling began to grow inside me, anger. For 60 years, I had lived as a gentle woman, forgiving, patient, quiet. But that night, I made myself a promise. If they thought my silence made me weak, they were about to learn what silence sounds like when it breaks. The following morning, I dressed carefully, a plain gray coat, simple shoes, and the same pearl earrings I had worn to their anniversary. My reflection in the mirror looked older, sharper, as if the betrayal had carved something permanent into my face. I took a deep breath and headed to the police station. The Financial Crimes Division was colder than I expected. Metal desks, humming computers, and a faint smell of coffee. The officer from yesterday, Detective Harris, greeted me with a polite nod. Mrs. Harper, please have a seat. We just need to go through a few questions. He spread the documents on the table. Copies of loan agreements, signature forms, and bank statements. Each page had my name. My signature. My supposed consent. I've never seen these before, I said firmly. That's not my handwriting. Harris studied me quietly. Do you have any idea who might have access to your personal information, social security number, ID, or bank details? My throat tightened. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to say it. My son, I whispered. My son and his wife. He didn't look surprised, just sad, the kind of sadness that comes from hearing such things too often. It happens more than you'd believe, Mrs. Harper. Elder financial abuse, family members using parents' identities for personal gain. But if we can prove forgery, they'll be held accountable. He handed me a card. You'll need legal assistance. Do you have a lawyer? For the first time in years, a name flickered in my mind. Martin Jacobs. After giving my statement, I walked out of the precinct into the sharp Boston wind. The city felt different now, less alive, more hostile. My thoughts churned with equal parts grief and fury. When I reached home, I opened the drawer of my husband's old desk. Inside, beneath faded papers, was an address book. I flipped through it until I found Martin's number. We hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. He used to teach at the same school as I did, before retiring to work part-time as a legal consultant. I hesitated for a moment before dialing. Hello. His voice was rough, older, but still steady. Martin, I said quietly, it's Evelyn Harper. There was a pause, long enough to feel the weight of time between us. Evelyn? It's been years. How are you? I wish I could say fine, I replied. My voice trembled. I need your help. Within an hour, we were sitting across from each other at a small cafe on Tremont Street. He looked older, his hair completely gray now, but his eyes were kind, the same eyes that used to calm nervous students before exams. As I explained everything, the call, the party, the check, the police visit, his expression hardened. Evelyn, he said finally, this isn't just emotional betrayal. It's a federal crime. He took out a notebook, jotting down details. Bank fraud, identity theft, elder financial abuse, these are serious charges. But we'll need evidence. Signatures, statements, surveillance footage, transaction histories. We'll get it all. Something shifted inside me at his words. For weeks, I had felt powerless, crushed under humiliation and disbelief. But now there was structure, a plan, a path toward truth. As we stood to leave, Martin placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Evelyn, I know this hurts. But you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for every parent who's ever been betrayed by their own blood. That night, back home, I sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt purposeful, like calm before a storm I was finally ready to face. Over the next week, my days began to revolve around paperwork, phone calls, and meetings. Martin was thorough, painfully so. He wanted every document, every receipt, every scrap of paper that could connect the dots. I gathered old bank statements, photocopies of my ID, and the check stub from the banquet hall. Each item felt like a piece of my life laid bare, but Martin's calm confidence kept me steady. One afternoon, we sat in his small office downtown, papers spread across his oak desk. He adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the loan documents Detective Harris had provided. See this, he said, pointing to the signature line. The pen pressure is different, the slant doesn't match your handwriting. And here, the date format. Americans usually write month/day/year, but this one says day/month/year. Whoever forged this used a non-US convention. Likely Mila. I stared at the page, my heart heavy. You mean, she did it herself? Or she supervised it, he replied. David probably handed over your personal information, but she knew what she was doing. A cold realization settled over me. It wasn't just greed. It was calculation. Martin continued digging. He requested surveillance footage from the bank branch where the loan was processed. 2 days later, we sat in front of his old computer as the grainy video played. My stomach twisted when I saw it. David walking into the bank, smiling confidently, holding a folder under his arm. The timestamp matched the loan date. I couldn't look away. Martin paused the video and looked at me gently. This is enough to prove intent. But we'll go further. He contacted a forensic handwriting expert, who analyzed both signatures side by side. The report came back clear, forgery confirmed. When Martin handed me the file, my hands shook. We're filing charges under 3 categories, he said. Bank fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1344, identity theft, 18 U.S.C. Section 1028, elder financial abuse, Massachusetts General Law Chapter 19A, Section 14. He paused, studying my face. Evelyn, once we proceed, there's no turning back. This will go to federal court. David and Mila will be arrested. I took a deep breath. Then let it happen. That night, I lay awake, the city whispering outside my window. My heart ached, not from fear, but from something deeper. There's a kind of pain that doesn't come from losing money or pride. It comes from realizing your own child saw you as a means to an end. I thought of Michael. He'd always said, "Our son will grow up kind because he's seen kindness." But maybe kindness, without boundaries, becomes a weapon in the wrong hands. The next morning, I met Detective Harris again. He smiled slightly when I handed him Martin's compiled evidence. "You've done your homework, Mrs. Harper. With this, we can move fast." The days that followed felt like walking through a storm. Warrants, phone calls, legal notices, it all moved quickly. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, I got the call. "David Harper and Mila Harper have been taken into custody," Harris said. "Their arraignment will be this Friday." I thanked him quietly, my voice barely audible. After hanging up, I stood by my window, watching the rain streak down the glass. For months, I had felt powerless, but now justice had begun to breathe. And yet, even as relief settled in, I couldn't ignore the hollow ache in my chest. I didn't want revenge. I wanted understanding. I wanted to know why. That night, I opened my journal for the first time in years and wrote, "The child I raised with love stole my name, my trust, and my peace. But I will take back my truth, even if I have to stand alone." The following days moved like clockwork. Every morning, I met Martin at his office downtown. He had an energy I hadn't seen in years, focused, methodical, relentless. "Evelyn," he said one morning as I walked in, "this isn't just a case anymore. It's a statement. People like David and Mila count on their parents staying silent. You won't." We spent hours reviewing evidence, preparing statements, organizing timelines. My old checkbook, the bank surveillance footage, the handwriting report, all neatly compiled into labeled folders. Martin had even gathered witness statements from the banquet hall staff. The catering manager confirmed that I had paid the $18,000 bill myself, in front of everyone. That one fact tied everything together. When I read his written testimony, a strange mix of shame and strength washed over me. Shame, because I remembered the humiliation. Strength, because now it would serve as proof. Martin had me record a formal deposition for the court. He set up a small camera in his office, turned on the light, and nodded for me to begin. I took a deep breath. "My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 60 years old. I spent 30 years teaching children how to read, write, and believe in goodness. But I never imagined I'd have to teach my own son the meaning of honesty." My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. He used my name to take what wasn't his, my savings, my credit, my peace. And yet, what hurts most isn't the money. It's knowing that love can be so one-sided, and trust so easily broken. When the recording ended, Martin's eyes softened. "That," he said quietly, "is what truth sounds like." The court date was set for the following Monday. By then, the case had drawn attention from local media. "Boston teacher defrauded by her own son," one headline read. I avoided reading the articles, but I knew what they said: the betrayal of a mother makes good news. Martin kept me updated on the prosecution's side. "They'll try to paint it as a misunderstanding," he warned. "David's lawyer might argue you willingly gave them access, or that you're confused. Don't let it shake you." "Confused," I said bitterly. "I may be old, Martin, but I'm not blind." He smiled faintly. "That's the spirit I need in court." That weekend, I barely slept. I walked the small apartment, rehearsing what I'd say if I were called to speak. I pictured David's face, tried to imagine what he'd say. Would he apologize? Would he even look at me? The uncertainty clawed at my chest. On Sunday night, I went to the church near my neighborhood, the one Michael and I used to visit. I sat in the back pew, the candlelight flickering against stained glass. "I don't want revenge," I whispered, my voice echoing softly in the empty chapel. I just want to stop hurting. When I stepped outside, the air felt lighter. Maybe it was faith, or maybe it was the quiet strength that comes when you've already lost everything you feared losing. The next morning, Martin picked me up early. The courthouse was gray and imposing, its steps glistening from a recent rain. Reporters waited outside, cameras flashing, their questions sharp and fast. Martin guided me through the crowd without a word. Inside, as I sat in that long wooden bench waiting for the judge to arrive, I folded my hands together and thought, this is it. Months of silence, humiliation, and fear had led to this single moment. I wasn't the same quiet woman who had once walked into that banquet hall, full of hope. I was someone else now, older, yes, but no longer silent. The sound of the gavel struck like thunder against the marble walls. The courtroom fell silent. I sat in the witness area, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, while David and Mila sat a few feet away with their attorney. They both looked composed, almost indifferent. David's jaw was set, his eyes fixed forward, refusing to meet mine. Mila, as always, wore a carefully crafted expression, one that said nothing touches me. Judge Whitmore entered, a tall woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "We are here for the case of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus David and Mila Harper," she announced. Charges include bank fraud, identity theft, and elder financial abuse. Her tone was calm but carried the weight of authority. Martin stood to make his opening statement. "Your Honor, this case is about betrayal, not of a stranger or an acquaintance, but of a mother. The defendants used their relationship to exploit the trust of Mrs. Evelyn Harper, forging her signature and stealing both her savings and her identity. We will show not only the financial damage but the emotional devastation this act has caused." I kept my eyes down as David's attorney rose. He was slick, practiced, every word smooth as oil. "Your Honor, this is a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. My client's mother willingly assisted her son financially, and later, perhaps due to confusion, misunderstood the situation. There was no malicious intent." Confusion. The word stung. I clenched my hands tighter to keep from shaking. The prosecution called witnesses. The bank manager testified about the suspicious loan application. "The signature raised concerns," he said. "We later verified it was not consistent with Mrs. Harper's records." The handwriting expert presented her report confirming forgery. Then came the catering manager. "I personally saw Mrs. Harper pay the event bill," he said clearly. "She looked uncomfortable. The Sun assured us she'd cover it." Finally, it was my turn. Martin walked me to the stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat heart-pounding. "Mrs. Harper," Martin began softly, "can you tell the court in your own words what happened?" I took a breath. My voice trembled at first. After my husband passed, I lived quietly. My son hadn't spoken to me in years. Then one morning he called. He said he wanted me to come to his anniversary. I thought maybe he wanted to make peace. My gaze fell on David. His expression didn't change. When the party ended, he told everyone I'd pay the bill. I didn't want to embarrass him, so I did. But then, I paused, swallowing hard. A few weeks later, the police came. There was a loan in my name. A loan I never took. I lifted my eyes to meet the judges. I gave my son everything I could. Love, time, forgiveness. But he took what I never offered, my identity. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air vents. Martin placed a comforting hand on my shoulder as he concluded. "No further questions." David's lawyer stood. "Mrs. Harper, isn't it true you once told your son he could handle your finances if he ever needed help?" I frowned. "I said that years ago, when he was in college, before I knew what he was capable of." "So there was an understanding that he could access your information?" "Not to commit a crime." My voice rose slightly, firm now. "Trust isn't consent." There was a faint murmur among the spectators. Even the judge's eyebrow lifted slightly at my words. When the testimonies ended, the judge took a long pause before speaking. "The evidence is clear," she said finally. "This court finds David Harper and Mila Harper guilty on all counts, bank fraud under Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1344, identity theft under Section 1028, and elder financial abuse under state law. David's shoulders stiffened, Mila's lips pressed into a thin line. The judge continued, her voice unwavering. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in federal custody and a fine of $100,000. Restitution will be made to Mrs. Harper in full. A weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying lifted from my chest. My eyes filled with tears, not of victory, but of release. As the officers led David and Mila away, he finally turned to look at me. For a brief second, our eyes met. His face was pale, almost blank, but in that emptiness I saw something. Regret maybe. Or just realization. When the gavel fell for the last time, the courtroom echoed with finality. Martin leaned toward me and whispered, "It's over, Evelyn." I shook my head softly. "No," I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. "It's just beginning." The morning after the trial, the city felt different. Lighter somehow. The air carried that clean, crisp scent that comes after a heavy rain, as if Boston itself had been washed of something toxic. For the first time in months, I slept without waking in panic, without hearing the echo of my son's voice in my head. I sat by the window with my tea, the same seat where I had once cried over loneliness and betrayal. But now, the silence felt peaceful, not punishing. I had survived what I once thought would break me. Later that week, Martin stopped by. He brought coffee and a newspaper folded neatly under his arm. "You made the front page again," he said with a small smile. I frowned, but he spread it out anyway. The headline read, "Boston Mother Wins Justice, Elder Financial Fraud Sparks Awareness Movement." I didn't want attention, I muttered. "I know," he said, sipping his coffee. "But stories like yours make people listen. They make lawmakers act." He wasn't wrong. Within days, I began receiving letters, dozens of them. Some were from strangers thanking me for speaking up. Others were from older women who had faced similar betrayals but never had the courage to go to court. Their words broke my heart and healed it at the same time. One letter, written in careful cursive, stayed with me. "You made me realize silence doesn't protect us, it buries us. Thank you for showing me that even in our 60s, we can still fight for ourselves." That single sentence became my turning point. 2 months later, with Martin's help, I registered a non-profit organization, the Golden Hearts Foundation. Its mission was simple but powerful: to provide legal guidance and emotional support to elderly victims of family-related financial abuse. We started small, a shared office space near Beacon Hill, 1 computer, and a phone line. Martin handled the legal side while I took the calls. The stories I heard were haunting. Mothers deceived by sons, fathers tricked by daughters, grandparents left penniless by those they'd raised. Each voice carried the same tremor of disbelief I once had. But I didn't just listen. I guided them, encouraged them, told them what I had once needed to hear. You are not weak for trusting. They are weak for breaking it. Within months, local news covered the foundation's work. Donations came in, volunteers joined, and slowly, the Golden Hearts Foundation became a name people recognized. One evening, Martin and I sat in the small office, papers scattered everywhere, as the sun dipped behind the Charles River. "You know," he said with a smirk, "retirement suits you poorly, Evelyn. You're busier now than when you were teaching." I laughed softly. "Maybe purpose is just another kind of classroom," I said. He nodded thoughtfully. "And you're still teaching, just a different lesson." As I walked home that night, the city lights reflected on wet pavement, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: contentment. Not joy, not victory, but a deep, quiet contentment that comes when you know you've turned your pain into meaning. I passed by the Grand Elm, the same banquet hall where everything had begun. The lights glowed warm behind the glass, and I stopped for a moment. My reflection stared back. Older, yes, but stronger and unafraid. I whispered softly to myself, "You took my silence, David. But I took it back." And with that, I walked away, each step lighter than the last. A year has passed since that day in court, and sometimes I still wake up wondering if it really happened, if my own son could truly have done all that to me. But then I look around my small apartment, at the framed newspaper article on the wall, at the stack of thank you letters from strangers who became my new family, and I remember, yes, it happened. But it didn't end me. The Golden Hearts Foundation is no longer just a name on a form. We now have a small team, retired social workers, volunteer attorneys, even a few college students who want to make a difference. Every morning, when I walk into our office, I see faces full of quiet determination. We've helped more than 100 elderly victims in just 1 year. Every case we close feels like reclaiming a piece of justice, not just mine but everyone's. People sometimes ask me if I've forgiven David and Mila. I never know how to answer. Forgiveness, I think, isn't about pretending the wound never existed. It's about choosing not to let it define you. I no longer hate them, but I will never forget what they did. Some lessons cost too much to be forgotten. A few months ago, I received a letter from the correctional facility. It was from David. The handwriting was familiar. Neat, controlled, the way I taught him when he was 10. I didn't open it right away. It sat on my table for days. Finally, one morning, I made myself read it. He wrote that he was sorry. That he didn't understand the damage he'd done until he lost everything. That Mila had left him. That he missed his father, and that he wished he'd listened to me when I used to tell him that money without integrity is poison. There were tear stains on the paper. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. I didn't write back. Not because I hated him, but because some silences speak louder than words. That evening, I went to the park near my old school. The spring air was gentle, the same way it used to be when I'd sit on the benches after class and watch my students run home. Children were still laughing in the distance. I smiled to myself, realizing that the world goes on. No matter how deeply we break, life always finds a way to bloom again. I've learned that grief doesn't always mean the end. Sometimes, it's the soil where something new grows. My pain built a foundation that now shelters others. And maybe, that's how love finds its way back. Not through family ties, but through compassion that survives even betrayal. As the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I whispered the words that had been in my heart since the beginning. A mother's silence can be mistaken for weakness, but when she speaks, truth trembles. Then I stood, brushed the dust from my coat, and walked home. Not as a victim, not as a broken woman, but as Evelyn Harper, the woman who turned her pain into purpose, and her silence into strength. As I close this chapter of my life, I can finally breathe knowing that my silence no longer defines me, my strength does. If my story touched your heart, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next journey of courage and truth I share. And before you go, tell me honestly. Do you believe every parent deserves forgiveness, or are some betrayals too deep to forgive?